When I did that introduction video for you, this was the final result. This was the completed 3D camera track of this shot. And if we look at it in 3D, we can see the camera moving. It's so nice, just moves straight forward through the shot. These trackers right here, they make up the tops of the fence posts. And we already discussed why we need those. We need those because of a made-up client note that they want to put holograms in front of this fence. So we need to know where those are. We also need to know where the ground plane would generally be. So we have that right here. And these bottoms of these fence posts. So this is giving us a good idea of where things are in our 3D space. So we can start laying things out. Here, I'll do that very briefly. Here's a plane. I'm gonna go into the left view and I will just reposition my windows to give me a little more space. I'm gonna drag a plane out right here. Obviously it's not in the correct position on the x-axis because I just dragged it out, but that's easy enough. I can go into this view and just move it over. If I select the mesh toolbar, I can turn off solid meshes. And let's make some adjustments to this just so we don't have such a overly dense grid. But yeah, so that's pretty good. Probably could be a little higher because my ground plane isn't totally on the ground. And you can fix that very easily by just clicking this hole button and ensuring that you have hole effects meshes on, and then when you make hole adjustments, it'll adjust everything, including your meshes. So there, we've got that down pretty close to the ground plane, so good. And now if we hit play, that fence is lined up really well. The fence is a little too tall, so we can make adjustments here to that. If we select the fence, I have to turn off hole to do that. Select the fence, and you can either do it with the spinners here, or you can do it right in the viewport. But if you do it in the viewport, it's gonna scale the whole thing. So we really do need to use the spinners in this case. We need to make adjustments to the height. If you hold down the control key while you manipulate the spinner, it's gonna give you fine control. If you hold down the shift key, it's gonna give you gross control. It's gonna amplify your spinner. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Go in the tracker view where we can see our view a little bigger. Yeah, look at that. That's perfect. That's why we needed all those fence posts tracked, so that we could tell where the fence was actually located, so that we could position this plane. If I wanted to change the color of this, by the way, which I typically do for my QC QuickTimes, but you can just click on the little color swatch and select a color or manipulate the sliders here. This is on the Mac. On the PC, your color picker is going to be different. I tend to render these over black and then put them through the whole redistortion, undistortion, lens distortion pipeline. Goes into editorial, gets composited there just as a simple screen comp over the original material. Okay, so let's turn off the image. So this is basically what my QC QuickTimes look like. So that's great, but in this video, I wanted to discuss how did we track these little orbs on top of the fence posts? Because if you look here on every single frame, let's go into the tracker view and keep your eye in this upper left-hand window. That pattern changes on every single frame. This is probably could use some repositioning, but that's okay because we're going to retrack all of this. It's impossible for a 2D tracker to hold on to a pattern that changes on every single frame. So how do you do it? This is how I do it. So I'm going to reload this shot, which is where we left off in the last tutorial. And if we think about the shot we were just looking at, tracker number 2 wasn't one of these fence posts. It was this little walk symbol, if you remember that from the very first video. And I'm going to retrack it right now before we get to the fence posts to cover one important thing. I oftentimes get shots from people and I look at their SynthEyes scene file and they will have used these gain controls and these brightness controls to beef up the contrast so that they can identify features more easily. And when you do this, You're tracking, and you see that in the upper left-hand corner that the image has been color corrected, essentially. What you should understand is that when you make adjustments to these spinners, to the gain and to the brightness, to beef up your contrast, that is not what SynthEyes internally sees. What SynthEyes internally sees that it is tracking is this image, the original, the color correction that you applied here in the image preparation setup. When you made that Hicon preset, that is what SynthEyes sees. If you really want to jack up the contrast for SynthEyes to get something a little more to grab onto for its 2D tracker, that's where you would do this. But any change you make here, that won't help SynthEyes hold on to the feature better. That's just for you. And when you pass off shots to me, if you ever work for me, not that you work for me, I'm not the boss of you, but if you ever did work for me and you sent me a shot and it had these adjustments on these spinners and I had to go in and fix your shot or continue to do more tracking, or if the shot was extended or whatever, I would want these reset before you passed it off to me. Some more things to talk about. You have this view toolbar, and you can drag that around, place it wherever you want, but it's typically in the lower left. And if you click fill, it's going to fit your background image to the frame. It's the same thing as hitting this button right here. That's the fill button. So if I move around and zoom in or out and I hit this, it's going to do the exact same thing as if I click fill here. 50% shows you the image at 50%, 100%, 200%. Those are obvious. Follow 2D is the same thing as hitting the 5 key. So if I track forward or backward, the tracker is going to be kept centered the whole time. As we move forward, by the way, in this track where you see it slip off, I'm going to get back to that in a second, but remember that happened. All right, what else do we have here? Follow 3D we can't use because that will keep the 3D point of the final solution centered, which means your tracker can shut off, but the 3D point, it'll stay centered on that. Red, green, blue, I'm skipping gamma for a second, but red, green, blue, that's RGB, but you can look at only the red, only the green channel, or only the blue channel. But remember, that does not affect what SynthEyes sees in the tracker. So over in this view, you see I have blue selected, that's the blue channel, but over here, that's what the tracker sees. You can actually change that. You can say, only track the blue channel. And you might find that tracking only the blue color channel works really well, and it looks like it would on this shot. You could also track only the red channel, which has lower contrast, and that probably wouldn't work well. But if I turn it to green, that's also pretty high contrast. Blue looks maybe the best, but blue typically has the most digital noise in it, what we would call film grain, but it's not because we didn't shoot it on film, and there's no silver halide component to this whole thing. Anyway, all right, let's set this back to RGB because we do want to track the RGB for this because it's typically fine and yields really good results. These are also toggles. So if I select red and then I click red again, it will send it back to RGB. These are just toggles. Alpha was for when we loaded up an alpha channel. And last but not least, there's this gamma control. And you can click on it and nothing happens. And you're wondering why did nothing happen? I clicked on gamma and it should do something, right? And here's why it didn't do anything, because it doesn't know what you want it to do. You have to actually click and drag on it. So if you click with your left mouse button and drag, you can adjust the gamma. And this is like if you were using Nuke, if you're a Nuke user, you've got your view LUT. Same goes for Fusion. You can apply a view LUT in Fusion, and it only affects the view. It doesn't affect the render. It doesn't affect what's being processed in the flow of nodes that you've set up. So that's what the gamma does. So it just allows you to quickly look at the image and see if you can see more detail. Like, hey, I can see detail in these trees up here. This gives you the ability to quickly audition that. Once again, very important, none of these controls and none of these controls affect what SynthEyes sees when it's tracking. So there you go. I'm gonna right click on the gamma, reset it, and there you go. So let's go back to the beginning of this and revisit this shot. And we're gonna quickly track this because I wanna get right to the posts because those are really the exciting part of this. All right, so we're tracking, and then we notice, like in here, oh, the tracker goes off. Well, why does it go off? Well, it's because right in this frame, I'm gonna turn off auto center, and the tracker's just cooking here, and you see the pattern is hugging the edge of the search area, which means that our search area is not big enough. So let's go back to the beginning. As usual, we'll go forward one frame from that keyframe. We'll shift right click on key now, blow away that tracker history, and go back to frame 0 and make the search area a little bigger. Why did I do that on frame 0? Why didn't I just do that on frame 1? Keep your eye in the lower left-hand corner right where the time bar is, right next to 0. If I make a keyframe here, you see my little black triangle facing up. That indicates that there's a position and a pattern keyframe there. And then when I go to this frame, it's like a gray triangle facing up. And that gray triangle indicates that there's a keyframe on some other factor. Here, let's go forward one more frame. I'm just going to track forward a frame. And here, I'll put a keyframe on the offset, okay? And that put another one of those gray keyframes. So let's blow away all of this stuff. Again, so I'm going to shift right click on key now, blows away all of my tracking history, but it does not blow away my search size. So let's quickly go forward a few more frames, and I'm going to make another keyframe on the search size, make it much smaller. So if I go back to this keyframe, shift right click on the search size, it will blow away all my search size going forward. So that shift right click applies to everything in the tracker room in this area. This offset keyframe, if I shift right click, if there were more offset keyframes, I could blow all of those away going forward as well. All right, so we've made this a little bigger now. Let's track forward. I'm just tapping again the space bar, just tapping the space bar, doing a slight reposition. Tapping the space bar again, slight reposition. When I get to this point where I'm really close to the mirror, I no longer tap the space bar because, well, one more tap, that'll be good. But one more, nah. I don't like it when it does that, and it's just easier for me when it gets that close. I'm gonna shift right click on key now, blow away my tracking history, to just tap the D key until we start getting into trouble. As soon as it gets into trouble here, I know I want to keep the tracker on this pattern even though it's going behind the mirror and I can just barely see it. So I want that. I want every frame that I can get out of this tracker. So let's go back to the beginning, hit the 5 key, keep it centered, or click follow 2D down here. And just take a look. Staying on target, staying on target. I'm just tapping the D key as I go forward. Boom, and it disappears. So perfect. And then I know it comes back. So we're back here. I'm gonna Z click. Hold down the Z key and click there. So this finger, my ring finger, that finger, that finger, my ring finger, that normally sits on the S key constantly, I just shift that down to Z when I Z click. So it really does, again, help. That ASDF key hand position really does help. Let's do that. Aiming for the middle of the motion blur, because it's pretty motion blurred. And I'm gonna put it there and then shut it off. I'm gonna go to here. It's not visible here, so we're gonna skip that. But Z click here, it is visible. And then there we go. I'm just tapping the D key and I'm making slight repositions And I'm making the slight repositions because if you look here where the mirror starts creeping in, you've got to compensate for that because SynthEyes is going to not like that as a pattern match. All right, let's reposition here. Great. Turn it off. It's going to come back again right here. And keyframe. Keyframes on every frame. Oh, if you look really carefully, you can just barely see it in there. I'm actually going to use that. I'm going to keep that keyframe. So this is going to be a bit like what we're going to be doing with our fence posts. And one more, and then it gets shut off. Let's QC our tracker because we always need to QC the trackers. Holding down the D key, going forward from frame 1, keeping the tracker centered. That looks good. And then it's on for only a few frames, but there are keyframes for the pattern and position on every one of these frames. So we're going to assume that that's good. You just have to step through those to make sure that it's staying on target. And that's good there. And now we're going to step through again. And that's good there. You can often tell, like if you keep your peripheral vision engaged and you're looking at the whole image, take in the whole image. Sometimes I'll even zoom pretty far out to make sure the whole image is staying stabilized around that tracker and it doesn't jump on any frame. You have to be careful through frames like this though, because when the tracker reactivates, you can only go through frame by frame and slowly tap the D key. Okay, and then when it comes back on, we'll be able to just hold down the D key again. So that's good. That tracker's done. We're gonna lock it and we're gonna get on with some fun. We're gonna start looking at these fence posts. These are impossible to track, right? Let me show you how to do that. I'm going to create a new tracker. So my ASDF keys, the F key slips down to the C key. I hold down the C key and I click and that creates a tracker. When I create these trackers around these features, what I typically do is I increase the size of the tracker to make a bounding box around the pattern. So when the pattern goes behind things, like this bead, I can kind of tell where the tracker should be. And then I go forward a frame, and now, when the pattern is behind the two beads, I can tap forward and backward with the S and D keys to check and see if I'm staying on target. Here, I'm in the middle of this like shadowed groove, and here I seem to have climbed up a little bit. So let's get that down slightly. That's better. Here it's a giant motion blurred streak. Oh, look at that. Okay, so on this frame, we actually need to be back a little bit more. Let's make our pattern bigger again. I'm doing this in slow motion so you can get inside my head and see the decisions I am making in really slowed down time. Let's get this bounding box around this pattern. That groove is more than likely right here. There's another shadow groove down here, but that's not the same groove because you can see that down here too. That's this. So it gets a little confusing, but make our pattern there. Actually, no, we're gonna go to here. Drop that down. Drop that down. So good. Okay. And then on this last frame, let's get in the middle of the motion blur. There's something you have to understand about motion blur, and also about crossing action and about light physics. Photosensitive material like film or an image sensor in a camera is more prone to pick up the brighter parts of the image than the darker parts, without getting super technical. So when you look, you've got this bright object in the background. Let's back up a bit. And it's, what is that? It's a car door. It's brighter than the surrounding image features. And so when we get over it, right here where the motion blurred foreground element starts getting over it, because motion blur tends to make things transparent, and you can see my face through my blurred fingers, you are having the same issue here. This ball on the top of this post is becoming transparent because of the motion blur, and then this brighter object behind it, it tends to overwhelm it because it's brighter. So you just have to get good at seeing that surrounding area and keeping your eye on the overall image stabilization. That's how you track things like this. All right, there's something else to know about this. Let's turn off the tracker here because the pattern is gone. Now I'm gonna lock it. So it's a very short lifetime tracker. And I'm just scrubbing it back and forth to make sure that the image is staying stabilized around that. That's QC'd, but it's got a keyframe for the pattern and the position on every single frame. So there's really not a lot of QCing to be done. And that is how you have to track these things. You have to track them frame by frame. You have to put a keyframe on the pattern and the position for every frame. And you could say, well, let's just skip those because they're too hard. No, we need them. I showed you why just a minute ago. You need the geometry of the scene so that you know where to place things in 3D space. All right, let's get on to the next one and repeat the process. All right, let's put that there. Now I'm going SD, SD. It's getting transparent here because of the motion blur, and then this brighter object in the background is overwhelming it. It is taking over, and it's doing it again right here, and it's gonna take it over even more there. So sometimes you have to bias your track to compensate for where the brighter part of the image overwhelms. Let's go in here, hand keyframing. Checking the general image stabilization. I don't think I'm on target here. I need to be down a little bit. Okay, let's do another one there. Now's a good time to start talking about trigonometry. As patterns get closer to the camera, they will occupy a larger section of the field of view, but they do this non-linearly. If you notice, when you get up to this frame, if I put, I'm gonna hand keyframe it here because I know we're gonna have to anyway at some point. I'm gonna hand keyframe it here, and I'm going to increase the pattern size to be that big. If I go back to this frame and I just start tapping forward and repositioning, because we're gonna have to do that, the pattern changes on every frame. Here we really can't see it behind the beads or through the beads enough. So I'm gonna turn off the tracker there. I'm gonna reactivate it here. But when I reactivate it, sometimes when you do that, because the keyframe interpolation for SynthEyes between sizes is linear, but the pattern size in the photography is expanding on a curve, you have to make adjustments as you go. It's sometimes helpful. It's sometimes helpful to make that keyframe at the beginning and then at the end, and then when you get to the middle, you'll have to shrink it. Here, I'll show you. Here, I'm going to quickly show you something. So very, very quickly, here we have a plane, and that plane is 1 meter by 1 meter. And it's traveling over time to 100 meters away. So on frame 100, it is 100 meters off in the distance. If I go to frame 50, and we look at it in the camera's point of view, well, that's not 50% of the size from here back to here. You'll notice that when the plane is right up by the camera, as I move forward, so on frame 3 is where we can see the whole plane, but between 3 and 4, that's a huge change, and 4 and 5 is not quite half that change, but then 5 and 6, it's slowing down in how much it's shrinking. until it starts to really slow down out here. Back in our scene, same thing for these patterns that you're tracking. So you can set up a keyframe, or you can set up a pattern on an object way off in the distance, but as it gets closer and closer to camera, the pattern is going to get big much faster. All right, what am I looking at? So you can get in my brain again. You can't look at the whole image as to how it's being stabilized, but you can look at nearby features. I might be looking at this post down here, and I can just see the post kind of going there. So I am gonna squeeze out that extra frame in its lifespan. And then when it gets to the next frame, I'm turning the tracker off. Actually, SynthEyes turned it off for me. Keep your eye on the tracker trails. You don't want there to be any spikes in the tracker trails unless there's an actual spike. But we're gonna leave that. We're gonna move on to our next pattern. And this is all about tracking the impossible. We are tracking things that people will tell you cannot be tracked, but we're tracking them. And on so many of the shots you see on my demo reel, they could not be done without this frame-by-frame approach to laying down trackers. All right, so on this third pattern that we are tracking, I'm gonna expand my search area to make that bounding box cover that orb. I want you to take a look at the graph editor that we have down here. That graph editor, remember that? It's starting to turn yellow. Eventually, it's gonna start turning green. And then beyond that, it's gonna start turning gray. And when everything is gray, that means SynthEyes is confident that you could attempt a 3D solution. This is the main reason that I leave this graph editor view visible. You set that in layout, camera, and graphs. I do it at the beginning of every shot. All right, massive motion blur. Okay. I'm tracking through here. The pattern changes on every single frame. All right, I'm making my pattern bigger. Here, the pattern changes so abruptly because, again, that motion blur, encountering brighter image elements in the background, overwhelming the foreground pattern that's completely motion blurred. Here, it's completely, totally motion blurred, but look at it. This is where you get to really see inside my mind. Remember that bounding box that I set up? Here's why. You see the feature in the image over here, and then that big bright area overwhelms it because of the photosensitivity of the image sensor. When we get back out to the next frame, get our tracker in the middle of that bounding box. It's gonna be bigger again, just to make sure we're staying on target. So let's get through here. Now I'm going through 3 frames. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Need to be down a little bit here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that looks good. All right, let's zoom out and take a look. So I'm gonna hold down the D key. And then we run out. That's the last frame we tracked right here. Let's go forward a frame. Reposition. And we're gonna lose some of the pattern over here because of the brighter thing coming in again. Z click to drag right there. Oh, and then I really am not gonna try and track through this. It's not quite enough. But Z click here. And that tree in the background is brighter, so it's gonna overwhelm our pattern again. But let's make our search area a little bigger. And we'll notice that if we make the search area bigger, if we hold on the left side of the pattern and use that as a guideline, it'll keep your pattern centered better. All right, let's go forward, forward, forward. All right, when we get in here for the QC phase of the program, I'm gonna make the pattern bigger because we're gonna retrack all of this, even though it's not going to actually do any retracking. I'm leaving the trackers shut off here. SynthEyes shut it off when I move forward. Okay, what I was saying is we're not actually gonna be retracking anything because we have hand tracked this and we have a keyframe on every single frame. When you have a keyframe on every single frame and you want to track through these areas where it's like it's hard to tell where it suddenly turns off and then it turns back on, you want to look at how well it stabilizes the image, don't hold down the D key, hold down the F key and just scan through your keyframes so it'll skip through that part where the tracker shut off. It'll disguise it, see that? And now I'm holding down the A key. So I can really see how well I'm holding on to that totally nebulous, crazy pattern. You won't believe how often to pull off 3D tracks, you have to do this. If you think about the car shots that I do, you've got a car and it's traveling down a tree-lined road underneath a canopy of trees. And all of the light from the sun is coming through the tree canopy and it's creating these speckled, mottled, flickering, flashing shadows over the car, while also on the car you've got reflections traveling over the curved surface, over the windshield, all around the car. There's no way to track features on that car. You have to find where the seam of the quarter panel intersects with the column on the... Once you find that and you can see it and you can hold onto it with your eye, you have to do this. You have to track that feature frame by frame by frame and you get through it. Now this seems like it's taking a long time. We've only laid down 3 trackers and it's been quite some time, but I'm gonna lay down one right here and then I'm just gonna do it in real time. I'll do it as fast as I do it. C-click here. All right. Get that to be like that. Okay. Even when SynthEyes is laying down keyframes for me, and it's tracking, it's actually tracking this feature. I'm putting a keyframe there. All right. When I get to this frame, I'm gonna make my pattern bigger. Shift O for only. Good. Good. I'm gonna make my pattern size a little bigger. All right, now this is, yeah, that's awful. Okay. Got nothing there. We can definitely get this though. Put it here, expand that out there. I can get that one because I put this keyframe here, and then when I go to this frame and I go, oh, there it is, there's the whole thing. Then I can make it proper, and I can go back to the previous keyframe and compare and say, yeah, I'm still on target. Now it just becomes a big motion blurred streak. Okay, this wasn't exactly real time. I did stop for a second to just explain a couple of things, but okay, so one other thing I have to explain is how am I doing this? My mouse pointer is not over here. I'm not dragging the tracker around. I keep my mouse hovering over this window in the upper left-hand corner, and I keep my eye on the center of the frame over here. When I click drag in this upper left-hand corner, that's how I'm moving the tracker around. That's how I'm making my adjustments. It becomes very simple that way. All right, good. Anyway, that tracker's done. Shift O again to allow me to see the other trackers. And I've got 4 trackers now on that fence post, and we can see this turning even more yellow. So I'm gonna hold down the C key, I'm gonna make another tracker. We're just gonna keep tracking these, but I'm gonna speed up a bit. If you have any questions about how I'm doing this, please do leave them in the comments, because this does get to be a bit esoteric. Look at that. That's crazy. What are we even tracking here? All right, another peek inside my mind right now. I keep telling you, with your peripheral vision, look at the whole image. Even though you're focused on the tracker and its pattern, take in the whole image. You can look and think of it in concentric rings, or a gradient of expanding out peripheral vision. And that gradient can adjust as you go, because you're just doing that in your mind. So right now, I might be looking at that gradient in my mind, might take in the whole image. I might be looking at the whole image at this point, just seeing how well it holds up through this area. Like, okay, well, there's parallax, which is good. You can see the trees moving against it in the background. But then you might also look in a smaller region, like here. Or you might look in an even smaller region, like just only like the semicircle of the surrounding fence posts. So I'll keep my eye on the fence posts down here, even though the pattern at the top is changing. And I can see that my fence post kind of jumps over to the right a little bit on this frame. I'm not looking in the center of the frame anymore. I'm looking down here at the fence post. So I want to, at that point, bring the whole fence post in a little bit and stabilize the whole, see, that's better. Of course, it jumps immediately off right when I do that, but let's just put it there for now. So yeah, you keep that surrounding area stabilized. So how does this look? Okay, let's just track forward. All right, I'm gonna get through these a little faster. I wanted to get up to this point. We're gonna end off on this tracker. The reason I wanted to get to this point is because now we can see, if we look in our graph editor at the bottom, you can start seeing green coming in. That's gratifying. That's just gratifying. To see progress being made is a nice thing. All right, we're jumping over a little too far to the right there. Actually, no, we should be. That's good. All right, then we'll come down here. Motion blur is a funny thing, and the only way you can get good at this is to actually do it. You just have to do it, and you have to do it and do it and do it, and eventually you'll get really, really good at it. And I invite you to use this footage that we are using in this tutorial to do that. A link to the footage is in the description below. Go download it, use it to practice. I'm releasing it under a Creative Commons attribution license, so if you want to make videos of your own showing how great a tracker you are, or put it on a demo reel, just give me credit for the footage. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do is not just leave the footage for you to download. I'm also going to give you the completed scene file so you can see what that looks like. It's not something I would ever turn over to a client, but at least it'll give you the opportunity to look more deeply into the work and look at how my trackers look. Okay, there we go. Let's go back. We're gonna QC the tracker. All right, and then in this case, again, we have keyframes on every frame. There's one frame here that doesn't have a keyframe. I'm putting a keyframe on it. SynthEyes tracked that frame. Thank you, SynthEyes, but we're gonna just go with the hand keyframed operation. Holding down the F key and just checking the stabilization. That's pretty good. All right. Lock the tracker. That's great. So what did we cover here? We covered this. We get to start seeing more and more green showing up. green, like a stoplight, like a green light. Go! And then yellow, like, well, pump the brakes, oh, homie. And then pink, red, like, that's no good. I'm not gonna even try. You can also look and see, right now we have 6 normal trackers active, and we can monitor how many trackers we have active right here under active trackers normal. If I right mouse click drag down here, I can manipulate my scale of my time bar. What else? So we covered how to track the impossible. That's mainly what I wanted this to cover. We covered this gamma control and how it doesn't have any effect on SynthEyes' ability to track a feature. Same goes for this with the brightness and the gain. Neither of those affect what SynthEyes sees, only what you see. I think that's it. Oh, wow, that was a lot. This was a long one. This was a really long one. And I'm sorry I skipped a week, but you get now you get basically 2 tutorials for the price of 1, which is free. So you're welcome. Please hit the like button if you found this to be helpful. And I hope you found it to be helpful. It would certainly have helped me early in my tracking career. Please subscribe so that you can get notified if there are new videos that I produce for you. And leave questions for me and comments, and I will answer those questions and comments. All right, oh, that's it, finally. Oh.